have seen that decision-making matrix of should we lease, should we buy, how do we find that location, what's the best fit for our business from both the very, very large scale corporation to, again, the mom and pop just starting out entrepreneur business endeavors. So what I want to focus on though for the HEB Chamber is more, we could go, there are so many ways we could go with real estate buying and selling, but let's just focus on the small business operator. A lot of the anecdotal stories I'm going to share are going to be mid-cities based, HEB based, this market, so that, it's all relatable for us in this room, but it definitely applies outside of the small business operator or medium-sized business operator and the cities. A lot of these topics we're going to talk about do apply there, but again, I'm going to keep really focused to how it applies to your standard HEB Chamber of Commerce member, startup business or existing business that wants to expand. And then we could go from there and you guys could ask me some questions. So there are some initial considerations that I've noticed when you're really trying to consider, what are my options? I'm ready to expand. I'm ready to open up shop. And again, we're going to focus really saying you've already narrowed it down. I want to be an HEB. I love the community. I love the chamber. So some things to consider. Really, this is going to be obvious, but I'm going to integrate some stories that I've witnessed over the years of how they really do apply. So some financial considerations. Really, what can you afford? Really, you may have a good way of providing a down payment to purchase a building. But you need to be aware of what that's going to take. These days, banks, lenders, they're very scrutinizing. Interest rates are higher. You have to be aware of those conditions. They're gonna really look at your numbers. They're gonna want a pretty significant payment depending on what those numbers look like. I mean, 20% is probably pretty standard nowadays for a loan. Now, if you're a business operator who wants to buy a building and operate it out of that building, it's going to make it easier for you to get that financing, as opposed to if you're looking at something as an investment property. It's a whole other channel we can go down. But it's just owner occupant. As long as the bank can see, that you've got a successful business model, then you've got a pretty decent chance of getting that financing. Again, being cognizant of the fact that these days the interest rates are much, much higher. And I'm going to weave in some stories. I just sold a building on Harwood Road, two smaller businesses. That one was the owner, one was the buyer, and I don't know that building could have been sold in this market with those interest rates had we not gotten creative. And in that instance, and this is something for you to explore if you're looking to buy a building, the seller was open to offering seller financing, and through help with the help of the title company, their in-house attorneys, we were able to figure out how to make it a favorable win-win situation for the seller and the buyer. Give them a little bit better, the buyer a little bit better interest rate, a little bit better terms than the bank would nowadays, and that made it a win-win. So there's going to be a new business coming to town off of Harwood Road. They sell vacuum cleaners, Mary, so just giving you a heads up to look out for that in the near future. What are your plans for your duration of stay? If you're just starting out, you may not want to just jump in feet first and buy that building. You may have the ability to, but maybe you want to feel things out. And that could vary. I mean, I've worked with entrepreneurs who are just starting out and the physical fitness business, Pilates, that kind of thing. And the solution really was for them, lease some space temporarily in a church or the YMCA and, create an arrangement there and build up your business base before you really jump in even to a 1 or 3 or 5 year term lease. But you get a little bit more flexibility. If you think that you're going to grow, you get a little more flexibility through the lease process versus the buying process. Market conditions, again, we talked about when you're buying, you're looking at interest rates. You definitely want to assess, what's happening in a given market. HEB, we're fortunate, very, very fortunate in that HEB has always been a very stable market, both for business activity, for real estate activity, not typically a whole lot of highs and lows for HEB. So that's kind of an easy decision. If you like HEB, it makes it easier because there are other markets in DFW, although DFW is very robust. But there are some other markets in DFW where you might want to take a step back and say, okay, what's going on in this market? Our business is coming in, our business is leaving. Really make that assessment and look at the leadership of a community, the leadership of a chamber of commerce. So you want to take a look at your market conditions and see how they really fit with what your plans are. What are your operational needs? And when I say that, do you need to really customize what your operation is? If so, then buying a property allows you a lot more flexibility to make those customizations within a property that you bought, as opposed to if you're leasing. Well, there's going to be some restrictions to what that landlord's going to allow you to do. Case in point was another business here locally that I've been talking to that they need some sort of flexibility for moving product, bulk product in and out of the building, but they mainly also need an office building. Well, they found a building that they kind of had both. They had an office and had kind of a residential garage where they can roll the garage up, move their product in and out. So, that fit their operational needs. And they're central here in HEB, so that also fit their operational needs because they're moving product to Dallas, Fort Worth, North and South. So be cognizant of what your operational needs are. Tax implications. So it's a win-win for leasing and buying when you're looking for space on the tax implications. And I would defer you to some of the very experienced financial folks within the chamber, CPA folks within the chamber. But you could get tax breaks both on the leasing side through what you pay in rent. And obviously, when you buy a property, you've got write-offs, you've got those tax implications for that. So really, you get a win from either one of those. So just, you want to talk to a professional, which I am not on the finance side, but I would recommend that you do to figure out what really fits where you are at this point in time. Market and business stability. Again, really going back and talking about HEB being so stable, but take a look at the market that you're looking at and where you want to be. There may be some opportunities. There may be some, what you want to do is what I would call a gap analysis, which is you go in and you look at a market and you say, well, I sell popcorn and ancillary items to that, and what's my competition? I mean, is there anybody in that market that really good that I wouldn't have to immediately I'm going head to head with, or is there an opportunity where nobody's really filled that niche and I can really succeed and thrive and get into the community? So you want to take a look at the market and really give that assessment as well when you're looking for to lease or buy. Maintenance and responsibility, that kind of speaks for itself. How much maintenance and or responsibility can you take on right now as a business operator? If you're just starting out, you're on a tight budget, then leasing, where you can find a situation where you know that the property is going to be maintained, the landlord is going to be a proactive landlord. I can't stress this enough, and I'm going to kind of weave in and out of this one too, but we do, at Vision Commercial, we do everything from landlord representation, meaning we represent the landlord leasing their property, whether it's office or retail, and we do tenant representation, so we're actually taking the tenant, prospective tenant, doing the site selection for them and trying to locate their site. We do both. I do both. And I can tell you, I've had clients, I've had properties where the landlord was local. In a lot of cases, the landlord is also a tenant in a particular building. And I've had situations where the landlord is not local. They're on the West Coast or the East Coast, and they're distant. And I would say 95% of the time in those situations, the tenants are much happier when you've got local ownership, local landlord, either they're in the building or they're in the DFW market and they have pretty intimate knowledge of what's going on in their property. Versus, you might have somebody who that property is just a part of a larger portfolio and they just don't pay as much attention to it. They just don't pay as much attention to the tenant. I'm not saying that that's, a bad model. It's a win for them. They're obviously very successful, but I say from the tenant standpoint, and that's really who I'm speaking to, is HEB chamber members who would be future buyers of their tenants. It works better pretty much across the board when you find that situation when you can get a hands-on landlord who knows their property and communicates well with you. And if you have any issues, then they're there for you. So kind of went off on a tangent on maintenance and responsibility, but that's a component of it, is how much do you want to take on as far as the maintenance on a property, and what's that partnership going to be like if you're a tenant dealing with a landlord? And then what are your future plans? Again, talking about a startup that maybe is just leasing space to begin with temporarily somewhere to build up their client base, or maybe you've decided you're 10 years in and you were entrenched in a community and you've been leasing for 10 years and you've saved up and you decide this is where I want to be for the rest of, I want my core business to be here. Maybe I'll expand and have other locations somewhere, but this is where I want my core business to be, and it's time to buy. So what are your future plans? That's going to really dictate, whether you want to put down roots further, or maybe leasing works out because you want smaller locations, and you want to diversify and be in other areas of DFW or even the country. So pros and cons. These are again some of them are going to be pretty obvious, leasing versus buying, but there are a lot of stories that could go along with these. So leasing, no-brainer, lower initial costs. Typically, you really require much less capital to get into a lease situation. Your outlay is going to be typically a landlord's going to want their first month rent, payment rent, and last month is a security deposit, and that's going to be your initial outlay. Now, there might be some improvements that need to be made to the property, but that's the beauty of, if you're leasing a property, everything is negotiable. The lease rate's negotiable. Remember that, the lease rate is always negotiable. And as a component of that, improvements to the space, changes to the space, that's negotiable. That's built into the lease. In a lot of cases, the landlord expects that. Rarely is a space really turnkey and a perfect fit for a tenant. There's always going to be some little modification, electrical outlets that need to be made, a wall that needs to be torn down, a wall that needs to be put up. And that's all negotiable within the lease, and that's all something that you could work out through negotiating with the landlord. So that kind of gives you that flexibility financially to get in pretty inexpensively, as opposed to if you're trying to buy a building and have to have that 20% down. Now, and along with that, the pro, you get that flexibility. But you're not building your debt equity. So there's the pro of buying is you're just like buying a house. You're making that investment in that property, and especially here in the DFW market, everything is going up in value. Taxes are going up, and valuations are going up. So, and I don't see that really changing. That's just been the DFW market as a whole. So, with leasing a pro, you get better location options. There's more flexibility with trying to identify lease space. You might, if I'm trying to help somebody locate somewhere to move to, and we're looking at leasing, we might come up with a dozen, 15 options right out of the gate that we can pare down into a short list. But your options, again, especially if you're dealing in the HEB market, maybe a little bit more limited if you're looking to buy. If you've got that criteria, say I need 2,000 square feet, I need it to be, some visibility, that really narrows down your options. And so you're going to have less flexibility on property options if you're looking to buy typically than leasing. Again, we talked about maintenance and repairs for lease. That's going to vary from situation to situation. So you want to make sure, and we're going to go over kind of the anatomy of a lease agreement here in a further slide, but you want to make sure you fully understand what your maintenance obligations are from a lease situation. If you're buying, you kind of know what those obligations are. You're going to own the building. You're going to be responsible for all of them. Tax benefits, we talked about that as well. You're going to get tax benefits both from lease or purchase. Typically with lease, you can arrange for a faster move-in process than a buy. If you're buying a property, that's just a process. There's going to be due diligence time. You're going to have to work on the financing side probably. And you're looking at easily, if all goes well, 90-day process maybe to kind of get through that process and that's even before you've identified or after you've identified the property. That may take you 6 months to find the right property. So there's a lengthy process when you're looking at buying versus when you lease. It's again, I talked about 12 or 15 options if you're looking for a standard lease space. And the modifications are going to be minimal. So, I've done leases where we've negotiated the lease and the tenant's been moving in within 2 or 3 weeks, maybe a month. So cons of both as well. I mean, it's, I think the big one to be aware of on the lease side is, you're no doubt when you enter into a lease agreement, one thing that's always going to be built in that's really hard to negotiate out of any kind of lease agreement is there are going to be escalations in your rent. And that's typically an annual thing, and that's going to be, and that will never end. There will always be escalations in your rent unless there's some extenuating circumstances where you can kind of negotiate that or renegotiate your terms, but more often than not, just expect that going in if you're going to be leasing space. There's going to be price increases consistently versus, again, with a purchase, you're building your equity. And so you've got other tools where you can essentially pay yourself back especially as an owner occupant in a building. There are some really great tax tools that you can do where you can, if you pay yourself rent. I've seen it happen, and it just is a substantial savings on the tax side. Another con of leasing, again, we talked about this. It's important to have a good relationship with your landlord, but you still are going to have limited control of how you can utilize the space, how you can modify the space, versus obviously with the purchase, you can modify it to your heart's content, contingent on building code and zoning and that kind of thing, and we'll get into that too. But when you're purchasing, when you're going in, you need to know, again, we talked about the upfront costs. There are going to be ongoing expenses as a owner occupant. You got to always take care of the landscaping. Things are going to break. It's just like home ownership. There's always going to be something, and so you go in and you just need to be aware of that. Market risk, again. Well, I'm a big fan of the mid-cities, DFW, HEB. That's why I'm here. That's why, you're not even going to find me working a downtown area. It's just so stable in this market. It has been, and I don't see that changing. So I'm very bullish on the mid-cities market. Enjoy working it. But you need to be aware sometimes if you're looking at other markets, what the fluctuation is. Again, what the economy's like in a given market. Liquidity issues, another con, you're tying up a lot of your capital on a building if you're buying versus if you're leasing, that really frees up a lot more capital for you to operate the business and do the marketing that you need to do, or sometimes the research and development that you need to do that would be otherwise tied up in that property. If you're a property owner, especially if you own a property where you do have tenants, we're not going to really go down that road a lot, but I'll touch on it. If you're having to manage the property and you're having to manage, if you're leasing out even a 500 square foot space, there's a building, 3 buildings down where I noticed they've been in executive suite and they're leasing out 500 square feet. And that's really just a small room. And it's a very popular product, especially in this market. But you've got to manage that tenant. You've got to negotiate with that tenant. You've got to make sure that the rules and regulations are set for that tenant. And if that tenant has any issues, you have to be prepared to address their issues, especially if you're that owner occupant, you're in that building as well. So you have to be aware of those responsibilities. Limited flexibility is a con on the purchase. I've got to look at my notes on that one because I don't know that I agree with. I guess that flexibility is really in if things change for your business, that limited flexibility, you're hunkered down. You bought that building, your roots are down, and if something changes, it's happened. I've watched a very successful medical type business with a dozen locations throughout the DFW, specializing in, let's just say, cosmetic surgery, which is a very popular product, a very popular service in DFW. Very, very successful business. I did a lease, put them in a building, 5-year lease. A year in, they had great credit, great tenant for that landlord. A year in, that partnership broke up. There were some doctors, and they had a little bit of a rift between the 2 doctors, and kind of changed the trajectory of that business model. And they had to close a couple locations. And one of the ones was the lease that I did here in Hurst, and just shocked them. But that happens. Business models change. The dynamic changes of the business. So I guess that's another word of caution as you're going in as a partnership in a lease or a buy, is make sure you understand what your partnership situation is, and that you're aligned on where you are moving forward, because either way, whether you're doing a lease or you're doing a purchase, that's an obligation. That's a legal obligation. And if you're doing a lease, and again, we're going to go over the anatomy of a lease agreement. Typically you are personally guaranteeing that lease. So you are legally bound to that lease. So you sign that 5-year lease, and after a year, your partnership breaks up, and you've got to close that location. You're still on hook to pay that rent for the next 4 years. And there are ways to also negotiate out of that, but unfortunately, I have seen more situations like that than I really have wanted to, where you see a tenant go in and the dynamic changes in their business model, and they either, it ends up being not the right location, or they've got to close that location for one reason or the other. So, a lot easier if you're a sole proprietor, if you're the one making the decision, or you and your employees are making the decision. But just, yeah, a word of caution, leasing or buying on that front. Another con on the lease is your deposit and fees. Again, with leasing, obviously not building the equity, you are, a lot of those deposits and those fees are just kind of the cost of doing business. So one thing that really doesn't get talked about a lot, and this is for leasing and buying commercial real estate, is once you decide what's your best fit, and we could go back to that slide, the previous slide, and you guys could ask me some more questions, but you really need to be, there's a process. If you're doing it right, there's a process of identifying, you decided you want to buy or you want to lease. You've made that decision. You know what's best for you. Well, how do you find that right location? There is a process, and I've seen this happen once, and this is an awesome story. And this is when I was working for the city. I had a business operator come in, and they said, I want to lease space in XYZ shopping center. And curiosity in me says, well, why that center? And they said, well, I want to be right next door to that business that's so successful, because I do the same thing, and if I could get even 5% of what they do, then I'm happy. That was their sole location criteria for placing that business, and it worked. I mean, they outlasted the business that they moved in next to. So it can work. I wouldn't recommend it across the board. There's really a process that you need to do if you're trying to identify, that optimal location, whether you're just starting out or you're looking to expand. So you want to clarify what your business